The skies had been strange all day, a dull gray blanket pressing down on the town with an uneasy stillness that made everything feel too quiet, too tense, as if nature itself were holding its breath. A group of high school kids had gathered after class in one of their garages, flipping through news updates on their phones while weather alerts blared across every platform, warning of an incoming tornado system tearing its way across neighboring counties. Each of them had grown up hearing stories about bad storms, but this time was different. This one wasn't just heading toward them. It was accelerating, becoming stronger with every update. The town's sirens hadn't gone off yet, but local chatter on emergency channels said it was only a matter of time. The kids looked at each other, a mix of concern and nervous energy building as they realized that while most people were hunkering down, they were getting the itch to move. One of them pointed out that their old pickup truck had just been serviced the week before, and the thought crossed their minds. What if they could help? What if they could use the truck to check on people who didn't have family, people who might be too far from town or unaware of the storm's strength? It sounded reckless at first, but the more they talked, the more it made sense. Nobody else was going to reach those isolated places if the tornado touched down hard. They knew the back roads better than anyone, having taken those routes 100 times between hangouts, fishing trips, and bonfire nights. As they packed gear, flashlights, water bottles, basic first aid kits, and whatever old blankets they could find, the wind outside picked up, sending loose leaves spinning in frantic circles along the pavement. A sharp blast of thunder cracked above the rooftops, followed by a streak of lightning, so bright it seemed to flash directly through the garage door windows. They paused for a moment, considering whether this was brave or just plain foolish, but something inside them had already committed to the idea. The old pickup truck's engine rumbled to life, a deep growl that echoed through the neighborhood like a battle cry. As they pulled out of the driveway, one of the kids turned on the radio, flipping through stations until they landed on the emergency broadcast frequency. Warnings were intensifying, with meteorologists urging people to shelter immediately. But these kids weren't heading for shelter. They were heading into the unknown. Street by street, they drove through the eerily empty town, watching as people shuttered windows, pulled loved ones indoors, and hurried through final preparations before locking their doors. They passed the local diner where chairs were hastily being stacked onto tables, the last of the staff rushing to their cars. Down a side street, they saw a woman struggling to cover her car with a tarp that kept getting blown away. So they stopped, helped her secure it, and gave her a quick rundown of what they'd heard on the radio. She looked at them like they were crazy, thanked them, and then ran inside. The deeper they drove into the outlying parts of town, the more evident it became that some homes didn't seem prepared at all. A mobile home park on the town's edge looked especially vulnerable, and one of the kids made a note to check it again on the way back. Dust and wind had begun swirling more violently now, giving the world a sepia-tinted hue like an old photograph, eerie and haunting. The kids drove past an elderly man sitting alone on his porch, confused and shouting something about a dog that had run off again. They stopped, made sure he got inside, and promised to look for the dog if they came back through. As they kept going, the radio issued a new warning. A tornado had officially touched down about 20 miles out, moving at a staggering speed and heading their way. They looked at each other again. No words needed, just a silent nod as they pressed forward. The truck hit a bump in the road and rattled violently, but it held steady. Old and rusted though it was, it had heart. They reached the edge of town, where farmland stretched for miles, and the sky looked like it was boiling, clouds forming a sickly green swirl that spelled out doom in every direction. The air pressure dropped suddenly, popping their ears, and all around them trees leaned as if pushed by invisible hands. One of the kids checked their phone, but signal was gone. They were officially on their own now. They passed a barn with the door blown off its hinges, and a field littered with scattered tools and overturned barrels. A small farmhouse up ahead had lights flickering in the windows, and they made a mental note to return and check on whoever lived there if things got worse. Thunder cracked again, louder than before, and then came the sound, low, deep, and menacing, the unmistakable roar of a tornado touching the earth. They couldn't see it yet, but they could feel it in their bones, a vibration that made the steering wheel tremble in the driver's hands. As the sky darkened further, almost black with only faint slivers of dying sunlight, the kids understood that they weren't just playing heroes. They were stepping into a storm that could easily take their lives. Still, they didn't turn back. The truck rolled forward, headlights cutting through the growing gloom, a symbol of resistance in the face of nature's fury. Every mile brought them closer to the people who would need saving. And with each passing second, the storm roared louder, promising chaos ahead. The wind was howling now, not just as a background hum, but as a living force, slamming against the sides of the truck with a fury that made it shudder and groan like it was protesting every mile. Dust, leaves, and debris were flying in every direction, creating a nightmarish blizzard of earth and splinters that reduced visibility to nearly nothing. The high school kids leaned forward in their seats, eyes squinting through the windshield as they gripped the dashboard and shouted directions over the roar. They'd barely gone 2 miles past the town limits when the first real sign of destruction emerged. A toppled telephone pole leaning precariously against a sagging power line, sparking and writhing like a snake made of lightning. One of the kids jumped out, clearing a safe path with an old metal pole they found in the back of the truck, while the others watched for shifting debris. When they pressed onward, the road was increasingly covered with fallen limbs, scattered shingles, and household items, coolers, chairs, even a baby stroller, all blown far from their origin points. The radio had gone to static, but they could still hear the distant, pulsing growl of the tornado. It was coming closer. They passed a minivan that had crashed into a tree, airbags deployed and doors open, but no one inside. Stopping to check nearby, they found a family crouched in a roadside ditch, arms wrapped around each other as they sobbed and trembled, too afraid to move. The kids loaded them into the truck's bed, covering them with the blankets they'd brought and giving them water. The wind ripped one of the blankets away, sending it skyward like a lost flag before it vanished into the swirling chaos above. They pushed forward, the engine groaning as the tires rolled over broken pavement, potholes, and scattered wood. They came upon a school bus lying on its side in a ditch, its windows shattered and emergency exit swinging wide open in the storm's breath. The kids jumped out, combing through the wreckage and calling out, finding only 2 passengers inside, a teacher and a young boy, both conscious but shaken and bruised. It took teamwork to lift them out, one kid stabilizing the ladder, while the others gently pulled them free and helped them into the cab. Time seemed to stretch as they navigated from one disaster scene to another, never lingering too long in one place, always moving, always searching for more people in need. They stopped at a trailer home turned to splinters, its frame half buried in mud, and found a woman holding a dog in her arms, both bleeding from broken glass. She couldn't walk, her leg pinned by a beam, so the kids worked quickly, using a car jack from the truck to lift the debris and slide her free. One of the kids had taken first aid training and wrapped her leg in a torn piece of a t-shirt while the others built a makeshift stretcher out of fence posts and tarp. As they loaded her up and continued, they were forced to take a detour through a field, the road completely blocked by an overturned semi-truck spewing smoke. In the open field, visibility worsened, the storm dropping sheets of rain so thick it felt like walls of water were crashing down around them. Lightning flashed constantly, sometimes close enough that they could see each other's terrified expressions lit up like photo negatives. They lost traction in the mud twice, tires spinning uselessly until they got out and pushed, soaked to the bone, hands slipping on the wet metal but never stopping. A radio tower had collapsed nearby, and the static from its wreckage made eerie, ghostly sounds through their walkie-talkies, now their only reliable way to communicate over noise. They drove past a barn where animals were stampeding in panic, cows and horses slamming against fences and braying loudly as the storm closed in. The kids didn't have time to stop but made a mental note to come back if they survived this first round. The tornado finally came into view as they crested a hill, huge, dark, and spiraling with a terrifying grace. It cut across the landscape like a giant's hand ripping the earth apart. They could see it consuming a line of trees in the distance, the trunks vanishing into its rotating belly like toys. The sound was overwhelming, a deafening roar like a freight train multiplied by 10, and it made the truck vibrate even at idle. The driver slammed the pedal, steering them away from its path but still circling the edge, looking for more people who might be caught in the danger zone. They came across a father waving frantically beside a flipped car, his wife and 2 small children trapped inside, the glass spiderwebbed and doors jammed. The kids leapt into action, using crowbars from their toolbox to pry open the door, while the father held back tears. Once the family was freed, they squeezed into the truck wherever there was space. Cab, bed, laps, it didn't matter anymore. The pickup was overloaded now, groaning under the weight of the people it carried, but it still crawled forward, determined. One of the kids climbed into the bed to check on the woman with the dog, handing out more water and checking on the boy from the bus, who had grown quiet, his eyes wide and distant. The tornado veered slightly east, granting them a few moments of relief, and they used it to race toward a small cul-de-sac where they knew several elderly residents lived. Windows had been blown out, and pieces of rooftops lay in the street like jagged teeth. They ran door to door, yelling and pounding until someone answered, helping elderly couples to the truck one at a time, guiding them with flashlights and shielding them with their own bodies from falling debris. With the last elder loaded in, they turned the truck back toward the main road, now half destroyed and littered with destruction, and sped away just as the tornado turned back in their direction. The storm wasn't over, it was just getting started, but they were no longer running from it. They were inside it now, part of it, wrapped in its fury and pushing against it with everything they had. Every mile deeper into the storm meant louder winds, more collapsed structures, and harder choices, but the high school kids didn't hesitate as they pushed forward, hearts pounding and eyes wide with the pressure of their mission. With every rescue, the pickup grew heavier, and with every turn, the storm threw new dangers in their path: fallen trees, power lines crackling on wet pavement, and homes that looked like they'd been bombed. Still, they pressed on, their truck crawling through the ruined town like a lifeline threading its way through chaos. The kids split into two small teams at each stop, one group checking buildings while the others stayed back to protect those already rescued, coordinating who to help next, rationing supplies, and keeping spirits from collapsing under the weight of fear. Inside a half-destroyed grocery store, they found an elderly man hiding beneath a checkout counter, clutching an old photo album and muttering names under his breath as if praying. One of the kids knelt beside him, gently pulling him out while another wrapped his shoulders with a blanket, assuring him he was safe now, even though the roof above them groaned and sagged with every gust of wind. Outside, the storm hurled a metal trash bin across the parking lot like a toy, slamming it into the truck's side and denting the rear panel, but the engine kept running. They moved on, reaching a daycare center whose back wall had been ripped clean off, revealing cribs and toys scattered in the dirt. A group of toddlers and two terrified workers were huddled in the corner, trying to stay calm as rain poured into the building. The kids moved fast, forming a line, shielding the children with their jackets, lifting them carefully into the truck, and double-checking that none were left behind. Every time they added someone new to the truck bed or cab, they made space by sitting on each other's laps or crouching on a floor, choosing comfort last and safety first. The young boy from the earlier bus rescue began crying softly, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of destruction around him, and one of the kids handed him their phone, showing a saved video of calmer times, a school talent show, a joke among friends, anything to distract him. Even as the storm battered the town, they reminded each person they rescued that they were not alone, that help had come, even if it wasn't wearing uniforms or sirens. At a gas station that had half its roof peeled off, they found a man pinned under a collapsed support beam, legs twisted unnaturally and face pale from blood loss. The kids didn't panic. They worked together, using a tire iron and chunks of concrete to lever the beam just enough to pull him free, then wrapped his leg with an old shirt to stop the bleeding and elevated it with a box of canned goods. One of them whispered that they needed to move fast because the funnel cloud had dipped again in the distance, getting dangerously close to their position. As they helped the man into the truck, others scanned the skies, spotting two more spirals in the far distance, satellite tornadoes circling like vultures. Time was running out, but they refused to let fear dictate their actions. They found another neighborhood that looked abandoned, roofs gone, glass covering the lawns like confetti, but inside one house, they discovered a pregnant woman lying in the hallway, screaming for help. She had gone into labor early, terrified and alone, the storm forcing her into a nightmare she wasn't prepared for. The kids didn't hesitate. They cleared a space in the hallway, laid down towels, and one of them, who had taken a family babysitting class the year before, took charge. With trembling hands but calm focus, they coached the woman through contractions, supporting her head and shoulders while the others stood watch outside, shielding the entrance with furniture in case flying debris returned. The baby came fast, crying loud and fierce like it knew the world it was entering was on fire, but alive and healthy. They wrapped the newborn in a jacket, bundled both mother and child carefully, and loaded them into the center of the truck, safe between walls of people who now shielded them with their own bodies. The storm intensified again, forcing the group to huddle behind an overturned vehicle as sirens blared from nearby emergency services who couldn't yet reach them. The kids waited for a break, then pushed forward again, detouring through alleys, through backyards, climbing fences, and guiding their truck over sidewalks and medians when roads were too dangerous to follow. In one neighborhood, they knocked on doors and found 3 deaf residents who hadn't heard the sirens or warnings, completely unaware of the storm's danger. With hand gestures and urgent body language, the kids communicated the emergency, leading the residents out and guiding them gently into the truck's already crowded bed. They stopped at another collapsed house where barking could be heard beneath the rubble. After several minutes of digging, they pulled out a terrified dog covered in ash and soot, its tail wagging furiously as it licked their faces in relief. Each person they saved brought new urgency, new weight, but also renewed energy, a reason to keep going. The truck began to smoke from the hood at one point, but one of the kids grabbed a bottle of water and cooled it down just enough to keep going. They were soaked, bleeding, coughing, and half frozen from the wind, but there wasn't a single voice among them asking to quit. Even when hail the size of baseballs began to fall, battering the truck and cracking a side window, they covered the rescued with mats and cushions, shielding them as best they could. A teenage girl they found crawling from a collapsed gas station told them her grandmother was still trapped inside, so two kids ran back and despite the building groaning ominously above them, pulling the woman out seconds before a side wall collapsed a heap. As they neared the town's old church, they saw the bell tower snap in half and fall, crushing a parked car, but inside, they found nearly 20 people crowded in the basement, praying and shaking as rain poured down the staircase. The kids shouted that they had space for some, at least the injured, the elderly, and the children, and worked quickly to guide them out. There were tears, there were screams, but there was also hope, held tightly in the way the kids moved, the way they lifted others, the way they kept going no matter how hard the storm fought back. Each decision carried the weight of lives, and each rescue hardened their resolve, forging them into something far greater than students, into guardians of their town. The truck's tires were nearly bald now, its suspension groaning and the interior a patchwork of mud, blankets, broken glass, and gratitude, but carried on. And so did the kids, rescuing whoever they could, wherever they could, as the tornado raged on. The storm turned savage without warning, changing its course like a predator, shifting its focus, and the high school kids, along with the dozens of people crammed into the pickup truck, suddenly found themselves right in its crosshairs. The wind shifted direction so violently that debris began swirling in reverse, yanking branches and garbage cans back into the air like marionettes with invisible strings. The road they had just traveled was now a swirling mess of overturned vehicles, downed wires, and roaring winds so loud they couldn't hear each other even when they screamed. The truck jerked under the pressure, struggling to stay upright as the wind slapped its sides with what felt like sledgehammers. The kids had no choice but to pull off the road into a shallow depression behind an abandoned gas station where the building itself leaned at an angle, missing its roof entirely. They yelled for everyone to duck down, covering the children with their own bodies, spreading arms wide and crouching in the bed of the truck as the tornado's outer winds lashed them with bits of metal, chunks of drywall, and shattered pieces of signs. One of the tires exploded with a bang, the truck sagging lower to one side, and several people screamed. The driver tried to restart the engine, but it sputtered and died, the hood steaming from the earlier overheating and hail damage. For a moment, it felt like they were done, that the storm had finally beaten them. But one of the kids crawled out from the truck bed, dragging a toolkit behind them, and went straight to work under the hood, hands trembling from cold and fear but refusing to give in. Another kid climbed up the nearby slope toward a damaged road sign, waving a reflective vest and trying to catch the attention of any emergency crews in the distance, though the visibility was nearly zero. The others calmed the rescued, passing out water bottles and holding tightly to anyone crying or shivering from shock. Rain poured harder than ever, drenching every inch of fabric until clothes clung to skin like wet paper, but no one moved from their post. Inside the cab, one of the rescued began hyperventilating, and a kid knelt beside them, counting breaths and whispering reassurances, forcing calm into the chaos. Just when they thought the winds couldn't get worse, the remnants of small outbuilding were picked up by the storm and slammed down nearby, shattering into splinters and sending a wooden beam through the back windshield. Luckily, no one was hit, but it rattled them to their core, a violent reminder of how thin the line was between bravery and tragedy. Another tire blew, and the axle bent as the truck tilted even more, becoming almost impossible to steer. Still, the kid under the hood managed to get the engine to sputter back to life, coughing smoke but running, and the others leapt into action. They started transferring the injured to a nearby concrete drainage ditch, using it as an improvised shelter from the next wave of destruction. The pregnant woman and her baby were placed in the deepest corner, protected by tarps held in place with cinder blocks and sheer will. While they waited for the tornado to pass over, the kids organized the group into shifts, some for lookout, others to tend to injuries, and others to calm children or reinforce the shelter with whatever could be found. A boy climbed onto the back of the truck and used a busted shovel to clear out debris from the wheel well, hoping to buy them a few more miles of movement. Another used an old pair of jumper cables to stabilize a splint for the man whose leg was crushed earlier, wrapping the cable in foam and tightening it carefully. Time crawled, the storm stalling above them as if unsure whether to leave or finish the job. The winds finally eased slightly, but the silence that followed was almost worse, unnatural, eerie, like the storm had merely taken a breath. That was when they noticed the funnel cloud again, larger now, coming back around like a predator refusing to retreat. They had minutes, maybe less. The engine coughed again, and they made the call to try and move. With two wheels nearly flat and the back dragging, the truck inched forward like a wounded animal, every bounce threatening to snap what remained of the suspension. They loaded everyone back in, jam-packed tighter than before, some lying across laps, others hanging onto the sides while the truck crawled out of the drainage ditch. They turned down a road they'd never taken before, unfamiliar and rough, the pavement broken and speckled with fallen branches. A collapsed power pole blocked the road ahead, but the kids got out again, lifting and dragging the lines to the side as quickly as they could. Another kid climbed a nearby tree to scout a path through the storm's edge and spotted what looked like a fire station with its lights still flickering in the distance. The new destination gave them hope, and they pushed the truck harder, forcing it to limp forward through deep water and around craters where trees had been uprooted. Just when they were within sight of the building, a blast of wind flipped a nearby trailer onto its side, sending debris flying into their path again. One shard of metal embedded in the truck's hood, killing the engine once more, and for the second time, they were stranded. Two kids jumped out and started pushing, legs sliding in the mud, teeth gritted with effort as they shouted for the others to help. Everyone who could walk joined in, forming a living engine behind the truck, pushing it the final 100 yards toward the station. Doors opened as emergency workers, themselves stunned by the state of the kids and their passengers, rushed to meet them. But before the group entered the station, one of the kids turned around, scanning the horizon. There were still others out there, others trapped, hidden, forgotten in the storm's wake, and even though their truck was nearly dead, their bodies exhausted, and their faces cut from wind and hail, the kids knew they weren't done. They needed rest, repairs, and warmth, but after that, they'd be going back out again. Because they hadn't just become storm chasers or heroes, they'd become a lifeline. And no matter how close the calls or how many setbacks they faced, they weren't ready to stop fighting the storm just yet. As the storm finally began to pull away, dragging its towering columns of wind and wreckage toward the distant horizon, the air around the fire station settled into a silence, so heavy it seemed to press against everyone's chest like a physical weight. The sky was still dark and angry, clouds rolling low like bruises across the heavens, but the deafening roar had quieted, and the tornado itself was just a flickering shadow now, moving on to terrorize some other patch of land. The high school kids stood drenched and shivering at the edge of the station's entrance, their hands scraped raw, clothes torn, eyes red from wind and debris, yet unyielding in their resolve. Around them, the people they had rescued huddled under blankets passed out by first responders, some being treated for injuries, others sobbing into towels or clinging to loved ones they had feared were lost. One of the kids sat beside the young boy from the bus, who had finally fallen asleep against their shoulder, exhaustion conquering fear. Another crouched next to the pregnant woman, now resting peacefully with her newborn swaddled in gauze and surrounded by warmth and safety, far from the twisted chaos they'd escaped. Emergency workers moved quickly, some stunned silent by the sheer number of people crammed into the ruined pickup, others shouting for stretchers, water, or radios as they tried to assess the scale of what had happened. One fireman gently asked one of the kids how they managed to do all this, how they'd stayed alive, let alone brought this many people out of the wreckage, and the answer came with a shrug and a voice hoarse from shouting, "We just couldn't leave them." The response spread among the paramedics and firefighters like a spark, igniting quiet respect, a ripple of awe that these teenagers had done what few would even dare. Once stabilized, the kids were ushered into the station's break room where warm clothes and coffee waited, but they couldn't sit still for long. Every time they heard a distant noise, a siren, a crack of thunder, or even the groan of the wind picking back up, their eyes snapped toward the windows, still wired to respond, to move, to act. One of them paced back and forth near the radio console, listening in on the emergency frequency, while others patched the holes in their jackets with duct tape and gauze. Another kid sat beside a map of the town, drawing with a pen on the back of a takeout menu, circling the places they hadn't gotten to yet, houses they'd passed, neighborhoods they hadn't checked, barns and trailer parks now possibly reduced to kindling. Though their bodies screamed for rest, their minds refused to accept that they were finished. They had seen what the storm had done, how fast it moved, how completely it devoured everything in its path, and they couldn't shake the feeling that there were still people out there, people hiding in cellars or trapped beneath collapsed walls, hoping someone would come. When the rain stopped for good and the clouds broke slightly, revealing slivers of blue sky, The world felt hollow and wrong, like a shattered vase that had been glued back together but would never hold water again. Outside, the town looked like a battlefield. Cars flipped and crumpled like soda cans, trees ripped from the ground like weeds, and whole blocks of homes reduced to foundations in silence. The kids walked through it slowly with emergency crews, helping where they could, pointing out buildings they remembered seeing in partial ruin, giving first-hand accounts of what roads were blocked and which ditches had been used as shelter. In the middle of a ruined park, they found a group of people waving frantically, residents who had holed up in a culvert under the playground and couldn't climb out because of the mud. Without thinking, the kids dropped their gear and formed a chain, pulling them out one by one, as if the storm hadn't just nearly killed them all hours earlier. Word began to spread. News crews arrived with cameras and questions, and the kids tried to avoid them at first, not interested in being turned into stories while others were still missing. But people in the shelters started talking, telling anyone who would listen how the truck had rolled up like a miracle, how the kids didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, just acted with urgency and care. A medic who had treated the man with the shattered leg told a reporter that he wouldn't have survived another hour if the kids hadn't reached him. The teacher from the bus said they climbed through glass and twisted metal to carry him out. Even the child who had barely spoken since the beginning pointed toward one of the kids and whispered, "They saved us." The pickup truck sat out front of the fire station like a monument, dented, stained with mud and blood, windows cracked, tires ruined, and beds sagging, but still intact. It had become something more than transportation. It had become the vessel of every decision, every act of courage, every selfless moment that had kept so many alive. When a tow truck arrived to haul it away for repairs, none of the kids wanted to watch it leave. They stood silently, hand in pockets, heads down, as if saying goodbye to a trusted friend. In the days that followed, the town's recovery began in earnest, and while professionals handled logistics, the kids kept working, delivering supplies, helping dig through rubble, locating missing pets, and supporting rescue crews. The fear they'd felt in the eye of the storm was still buried deep inside, but it didn't stop them. It fueled them. Community members brought them food, clothing, and thank you cards, though the kids never asked for it. They only ever asked one question: who else still needs help? They had become part of something bigger than themselves, a force driven not by heroism, but by love for the people around them. As weeks passed, and the town slowly stitched itself back together, the story of what they had done became legend, not in the way of fairy tales or exaggeration, but in the undeniable truth that sometimes, in the darkest hour, the ones least expected to lead become the ones who save the most. And the high school kids, now forever changed, didn't see themselves as saviors. They saw themselves as people who had simply refused to stay still when the storm came. And when others asked if they'd do it again, they didn't need to speak. Their truck, the same one, now repaired and polished, parked under the same garage where it all began, held the answer: